Welcome to the Altered Call podcast. Today we'll explore what it sounds like to hear something from God. How do you know for sure? And what does God's voice actually sound like? My name is Pillischafske. I believe that our Creator thinks He's funny. I believe that all legalism is equally annoying. And I believe that you are uniquely created to reflect God's glory in the world. So let's assume that you've taken the necessary steps to establish talking to God. You've built an authentic relationship. You've removed distractions, and you're expecting to hear something. What is it that you are listening for? And how do we know if it's God or if it's something else? Your attention is one of the most valuable resources that you control. This should be made apparent by how aggressively everyone else fights for access to it. Companies will pay millions of dollars to get only a few seconds of time and attention from a particular audience because they know that they can convert that attention to even more millions of dollars later on. Your brain is a pattern recognition machine, meaning that whatever you decide to set your focus on, your brain will automatically attempt to understand it and assign value to it. A positive association will lead to a conscious or unconscious desire to engage with that idea, while a negative association will lead to avoidance. As such, advertisers do everything in their power to connect positive value to their particular product. This is why commercials rarely explain the product or company in question. They don't care that you understand it. They simply want your brain to like it. I discussed the idea of a lens in the tools episode, but I want to cover it again here. A lens allows you to focus your brain on a particular topic by shifting your perspective accordingly. Everyone has many different lenses that they use to view and understand the world. It is important to know the lens with which you view the world because that will subconsciously color your perspective. When you decide to start attempting to listen to God, it opens your perspective to one of expectation. This new lens encourages your brain to seek out signs, and if you aren't careful in your discernment, you can end up becoming very confused. By opening yourself up to what I call triggers, you allow God to speak directly into your life, but you simultaneously open yourself up to everything else that might want to guide your steps. A trigger is simple. It's something that you perceive to have meaning. I gave some examples in the last episode on hearing God's voice, and they ranged from hearing a song for the first time to hearing a direct word from God regarding my calling. There are lots of triggers in life that stand out. Getting married, the birth of a child, a major accomplishment, a crushing defeat. It's easy to assign value to those instances because they feel meaningful when they occur. They automatically draw your attention in. A wedding requires planning. Babies announce themselves months before they are born. You have to sacrifice towards a major accomplishment, and a crushing defeat takes away something valuable. These events are far too big to ignore, so in that sense, we all process the trigger. This doesn't mean that we have a uniform response, but we all tend to attach meaning to the event itself. Subtler triggers are much easier to ignore or suppress. The problem with triggers is that they are intensely personal. I've done a lot of work with men helping them to process through these events, and it takes a little bit of practice. Usually someone new to the process will readily accept the trigger as significant, but as soon as they begin to go into the details, they will be tempted to end the conversation. Either they will try to assign it value quickly and attempt to move on, or they will try to downplay the significance in order to feel less vulnerable in the moment. It is important to note from the very beginning that these things are only triggers for you because they affect you. The same event might mean nothing to the man sitting next to you, and that's okay. These aren't universal, and that is precisely why they are so powerful. God made you to be unique, so He knows how to interact with you in unique and interesting ways. God gave you all of your various passions, interests, and weaknesses. He didn't give them to you so that you could be lesser in some sense, but because they are important. If something bothers you or draws your attention in, don't make the mistake of assuming that it doesn't matter only because it wouldn't have the same impact on someone else. The other day I was doing a counseling session, and the guy that I was working with brought up that as a child he wanted to join the military. It seemed clear to me that there was passion in this conversation, so I decided to explore it a little more. As a child, military service had always appealed to him, but since he was no longer eligible, he was prepared to dismiss the entire conversation as meaningless. I asked him to entertain my curiosity, and we quickly discovered that for him, joining the military was a shorthand that he was using to mean being part of something bigger than himself and leading men in a hands-on fashion towards a common goal. By separating the two ideas, we were able to keep the core intact while removing military service as the vehicle used to accomplish that goal. Let me give a personal example. The other day I heard a song for the first time. It was released by one of my favorite bands after they had taken considerable time off, and something about it just stuck with me. I couldn't get the song out of my head, which is common for me with new music, but in this case it felt different. I listened to the song over and over again until I isolated the lyrics that seemed to be the root cause. At the time, I was struggling to put together all of the various pieces of this podcast and feeling frustrated that things weren't developing more smoothly. The lyrics in question presented a bleak scenario, but paired it with ambition and hope. It was a crystallization of what I was feeling at the time, and now I view it as encouragement to keep striving in this new direction. Notice how my lens, the idea that God is both active and encouraging in my life, gave me permission to notice the intrusion and allowed me to ultimately process it as divine inspiration for my journey. Without this lens, I could have been tempted to miss both aspects of the trigger. So was this trigger from God? Does it matter? In this case, nothing about my life functionally changed, and now I feel encouraged when I listen to a song that I enjoy. So there does not appear to be any real risk of just accepting it and moving on. God, not God, in this case, it's all the same. Don't bother fighting battles and defining things unnecessarily. An open hand when it comes to all of this will help you keep your sanity and remain humble. Now let's cover situations where it does matter and attempt to figure out in those instances who might be talking. I've broken down the various voices into 4 groups that I think are common. You, the enemy, God, and noise. Noise is the easy one because it's a catch-all category. There are tons of different things that fall into this. You get to choose if you want to engage with those ideas or not, but in general, there isn't much substance to them. This is the type of thing that I'm just prone to ignore. Put simply, a thing happened or new information was introduced. Now you get to choose what, if anything, to do about it. The end. No point of interest or emotional attachment, just a thing in the world. The problem that noise introduces is that there's just so much of it. The ability to filter out all of the noise will open the door to hearing everything else with much more clarity. We will cover this in detail in the Mind episode of the Self series, so that's coming soon. But for now, noise is just something that we attempt to ignore in pursuit of the more meaningful voices that we will encounter. The first real voice that you might hear in all of this is your own. Your voice understandably centers around yourself and your perspective. It always wants the things that you want and believes the things that you believe. This might seem straightforward, but if you are unaware of your own beliefs or how they interact with each other, then this voice can easily be confused with something else. This often occurs when you hold multiple competing beliefs about an idea at the same time. If you don't know the hierarchy of those beliefs and the trigger is pointing towards an unintuitive outcome, then you can be tempted to misinterpret the source. For example, let's say that you hold these 2 beliefs. 1, debt is bad. 2, reliable transportation is essential. When your car breaks down, you decide to take out a car loan, and now you feel regret. This trigger could be God calling your attention to something, but more likely it is the 2 competing beliefs trying to determine which is superior. If the debt is bad belief wins, then maybe you have to return the car. If the reliable transportation belief wins, then you need to find another solution or accept the existence of the debt. Hearing and responding to your own voice can help you to understand your own beliefs and can be extremely valuable in learning what is important to you. This comes in particularly handy when addressing the minimum acceptable standard for your mind. Your voice is worth listening to and understanding, but it isn't God. Keep that distinction and you should be fine. Let's move on to God's voice. On a good day, this voice could be confused with your own. But as a general rule, God isn't concerned with the things that you like or believe. God's voice speaks the truth. Whether you like it or not, and often will call your attention to things that you would rather just ignore. For someone that is pursuing God, these things will often be on topics that contain known weaknesses, but periodically you will be surprised by something less predictable. Even with experience in knowing God's voice, you can be tempted away from responding to these triggers because they often won't make sense in the moment. A friend told me the other day that he was feeling guilty because he was convinced that he had ignored a call of God. He was working in a coffee shop and felt a strong draw to talk to one of the other patrons, but he didn't know why. This isn't the type of interaction that he normally desires, so he decided to ignore the feeling in real time. From my experience, this is the type of thing that feels like God's voice. It's not something that he would normally feel compelled to do. The outcome and the process were uncertain, and he was tempted out of it by rationality. So is this God interceding? I don't know, and neither does he. Unless you are willing to take the risk and engage with this type of prompting, unless you take a step forward in faith, you will never know if this is the voice of God pushing you forward or just random noise. I love to encourage people to explore these types of triggers, particularly if they are low risk. You might feel crazy doing the thing in real time, but just consider it a sacrifice towards hearing God's voice in bigger and riskier ways down the road. It won't always bear fruit, and sometimes it will seem like a clear miss, but you can only learn by trying. Denying the voice and moving on doesn't give you the opportunity to succeed and doesn't allow for the recalibration of failure. What does recalibration look like? A single failure? Ignore it. Just accept that you don't know. Repeated failures or lack of fruit, and I'd probably accept the fact that it isn't God's voice that you are hearing. What about a single success? Mostly ignore it. Positive feedback is better than negative, but maybe you just got lucky. Repeated success? Now I'm going to start to trust the voice, and I'm going to start to look for it to point you towards increasingly more challenging scenarios. Again, you might not see fruit all of the time, but with a track record of success, I would start to consider that you might be on the right path. The biggest markers of God's voice are its fruitfulness, reliability, and peace. Now, these things may only occur after you take a stressful step in faith, but they should all show up at one stage or another in the process. Ultimately, you never get to know for certain, and that is what the enemy is banking on. What about the voice that we want to avoid? What does that sound like? Honestly, it sounds like God sometimes, and it sounds like our voice at other times. This is why discernment is so important, because it can be really hard to tell. And while the enemy would be happy if he could push you towards failure, really the only thing that he needs to do is create doubt. Does God really talk? If he does, would he waste his time talking to you? If you can't see the fruit, did anything meaningful really happen? Doubt and confusion lead to frustration. Frustration leads to hopelessness and paralysis. This is what the enemy wants. So how do we stop it? Step 1, don't give up. God is out there and he wants you to keep pursuing him. Step 2, learn the tricks of the enemy. The enemy loves to speak impartial truths or to distort beliefs that you hold. The longer that you wrestle with the ideas of his voice, the easier it will be to see these tricks for what they are. Step 3, practice discernment. This is another point where leveraging other believers is essential. Maybe you can't yet distinguish between God and the enemy, but a more experienced Christian should be able to help. Don't take their input as law, but explain the issue in detail and take their feedback seriously. Over time, it will be easier to single out this voice. A few months ago, I was facilitating a trigger conversation with one of the men in my group, and he said that he kept having the thought that he needs to work harder. This one was tricky because I could see it belonging to any of the 4 categories. I asked him for his initial thoughts on the situation, and he said that it felt like either God or self. Now, he and I had worked together previously, and I knew from those conversations that he was very hard on himself and often felt like he needed to do more in order to feel worthy of love. I told him that this could absolutely be a reliable voice. Maybe he does legitimately need to work harder. But I also pointed out that he was prone to believing this type of thing about himself to an unhealthy extent, and that this is the type of belief that the enemy would be happy to use in order to manifest a spiral of guilt and shame. Another tactic that the enemy uses is hiding the fruitfulness of a thing. You often won't know, even after stepping out in faith, whether something was fruitful or not. Maybe the fruit wasn't meant for you to see. Maybe you were just wrong. Maybe you were tempted to evaluate it by the wrong metric. Who knows? That said, the enemy loves to create doubt in these scenarios, so be aware. I remember a night in college. I was having a horrible day, and I decided to go to the chapel's prayer room to vent my frustrations to God. On my way out of the building, I peeked into the sanctuary because sometimes I would find a friendly face in there at odd times of night. On this particular night, I ran into a guy that I didn't know. I apologized for bothering him, and he asked why I was there. I asked if he was religious at all. I didn't even say Christian, and explained to him that I had a rough day and that I was yelling at God. Then I wished him well, and I left. That was it. 3 years later, I ran into that guy again. Now, we attended a very small college, and the fact that we had gone 3 years without seeing each other was pretty odd. Somehow, he had been encouraged by our conversation and had decided shortly thereafter to return to his faith, and given that he hadn't seen me, had also decided that I was an angel sent specifically by God. Now, this was years before I knew anything about triggers or hearing from God, and I certainly didn't do anything in my eyes that should have warranted a conversion experience, especially given my poor state of mind. But somehow, God used me, and it wasn't until years later that I was given any indication of the amazing fruit that resulted. I've recently come to appreciate the language that the Bible uses when it talks about the world being in opposition to Christians. It doesn't say look out for these specific things or these particular types of people. Instead, it says that the world is our enemy. Sometimes it feels like every conceivable force is against us, both external and internal. If we can't trust the messages that we are fed by culture, and we can't always trust the validity of our own thoughts and experiences, then how are we possibly supposed to navigate our lives in a fruitful way? It feels like there are pitfalls all around. So why even try? And I think that is ultimately the point. The enemy wants you to give up. Instead of taking chances and trying to find a path that works, you should just give up, because it might be dangerous or painful to accidentally take a few steps down the wrong path in search of the right one. Don't give up, and don't risk standing still. Believe that God is real. Believe that He knows a better way, and keep searching until He shows it to you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Altered Call podcast. You can reach me by email using alex@alteredcall.com, or you can visit the website for additional information.